Bateson. I'm a cultural anthropologist. I've done a lot of my research working with life histories and thinking about the human life cycle. And I'm thinking about the effect of changes in the shapes of lives that are taking place in our society today. And in the name of reflexivity, let me also mention that I've recently become a grandmother. I have a 3-year-old grandson. So I've been rethinking no longer the shapes of individual lives, but the shape of the system in which different generations interact. And what you have up here on the screen is a diagram of 3 life cycles as they co-occur. If you start in the lower left black circle, you have a child who, moving clockwise, grows to adulthood. The red circle represents another child. The adult grows old, the child becomes adult, has another child. The dots represent the transitions where the personnel is changed. But basically, at all times, through most of history, society has consisted of 3 overlapping, simultaneous generations going through this kind of cycle. The personnel gets a little skimpy in old age, maybe, but the basic human pattern has been that someone who was lucky enough to live to reproduce would probably see at least one grandchild, and most children would know at least one grandparent. That's one way of putting it. Notice there's no ages on this chart. It's been changing gradually for a long time, but this diagram represented the pattern of intergenerational overlap at the time when Bismarck created the institution of retirement, a wonderful idea of social insurance for people who were no longer old enough to work. Bismarck created it around the turn of the century. His view was that social insurance, it ought to be possible for people to stop working and rest and be supported at age 70. At that time, life expectancy in the United States was 47, so probably comparable in Germany. It was 30 worldwide, which means you weren't likely to be retired for very long, nor was the economic burden of retirement a major issue for society. However, something else very important is happening in this diagram. We have data, for instance, that the survival of the presence of a maternal grandmother makes a substantial difference in child survival, so that the interaction between a mother and her mother and their interaction with the child is an important social mechanism, and more broadly, the presence of 3 generations, I think, creates the possibility of a stochastic process where change can come in and you have the different generations comparing things back and forth and selecting among changes. So this is a very functional system. And the thing I would say about the elders on this diagram is they have long memories and short walks, which is to say that the people that Bismarck was providing the pensions for were inclined to sit still. They were available laughs. And one of the big differences between grandparents today and grandparents up to, let's say, the end of World War II is the mobility that characterizes them. So this pattern of the relationship between generations was pretty valid up to the end of World War II. It's been changing fairly rapidly since then with demographic change. people used to think of generational change in terms of passing the baton, as in a relay race. What we have today is, I think, a fundamental systemic change in the relationship between generations. What has happened in this diagram is that we have shifted from being a 3-generation society to being a 4-generation society. You can follow child. Adulthood has become massively longer. What you have now is people at 60 deciding to go back and get a new doctoral degree, eloping and getting married, making major life changes, so that I've marked adulthood as adult 1 and adult 2, and old age as a period of decline and chronic illness, as it always has been. In other words, it's really important never to think of the demographic change of increased longevity as an addition to the life cycle. It's a total reshaping of the life cycle. Like Russ Acuff talking about what you stick into the house has to accommodate the total shape of the house. What we have here, I believe, is the second stage of adulthood that follows the primary childbearing and early career building years, and has essentially been inserted into the life cycle by modern medical possibilities. Sometimes I speak of it as an atrium. It's not a room added to a house. It's an atrium opened up in the middle with a lot of possibilities going off of it. Now, everybody, particularly economists, is in a state of dither at the moment about what's called the dependency ratio. We're having fewer children, and people are living a lot longer than they were in Bismarck's time. So the large numbers of people are retiring essentially at the end of adulthood 1. They're healthy, they're strong, they have skills and resources, and we have been fixated on the retirement age that was set up in Germany almost a century ago.